In this video, we're going to show you how to install upper strut bearings on your Toyota Camry located on the top side of your struts. Use a pry tool and go ahead and pop off that center cap. Set that aside. Use a 21mm socket to go ahead and loosen and remove the lug nuts. Remove the wheel and set it aside. Loosen the nut on your tie rod using an 18mm socket. I'm going to apply some upward pressure on our tie rod end, and I'm going to strike the knuckle right here. Release that and set it aside. Using a 14mm socket, want to loosen and remove the nut for the sway bar end link. Go ahead and move that link out of the way. Using a 12mm socket, loosen and remove the bolt for the brake flex hose right here. Using a 22mm socket and wrench, I want to go ahead and loosen the bolt and the nut here. Let's go ahead and remove the bolts for our strut here. Now when doing this here, you want to make sure that the knuckle doesn't drop and rip or pull on this flex hose here. If you have to, make sure you can get a securing strap of some sort to keep this knuckle from falling too far. You can still go ahead and anchor it to the strut if you need to. Just allow this to come down. So we're going to work on this here, separating this strut from the knuckle. If you want to, you can use a pry bar. Go ahead and pop that out like so. Now on the inside of the engine compartment here, we have our driver's side strut tower, and there are 3 14mm nuts on the top here you want to loosen and remove. Now when you remove the last nut, the strut is going to want to drop out. So as you're removing the third one, you're going to do the nut and reach inside the wheel well and support that strut. Now when pulling the strut out, be careful not to catch the axle boot. Tip this up and remove it. Here we have our strut assembly installed in our tool. Now I'm going to take a crayon here, and you can see I had marked pretty much a straight line from the bearing cap and hat down here and onto the spring, and then down here the spring onto the strut assembly. That way when we reassemble, everything lines up as it should. At this point here, we can go ahead and start to compress our spring and proceed with our disassembly. We're now going to go ahead and compress our spring. We can see that our strut and our bearing cap is now loose. Our next step is to go ahead and loosen and remove this upper nut. Now on the top here, we have our 19mm socket, we have our impact gun. Now when we remove this nut, the strut's going to want to drop out, so you're going to kind of hold that strut from the bottom. Go ahead and loosen this nut. Going to remove that nut. Go ahead and remove that bearing cap And we're going to go ahead and lower that strut assembly. Go ahead and remove that bearing. We have this unit right here. We have everything lined up still. Go ahead and take your new bearing, set that down in place. Installing our cap here, you want to install it the same way that it had come off. So we have that mark right here. You want to position that cap the correct way. You can see that the mark is just beside this stud. So we're going to set this on top like so. So we have the bearing plate in place. This is basically lined up in the same position as the original. Feed the strut up inside the boot. Push that up and in. We're going to feed the strut shaft up. Get that nut started up top. One of the key things here is matching up this spring bushing right here with the spring itself, and then follow that line up. I want to get that cap, the upper bearing cap, lined up as close as possible. Now we can go ahead and tighten the nut up top. Now making sure that our tail of our spring is in the tray on the bottom. Make sure everything is lined up. Let's go ahead and tighten down this upper bearing nut. Now make sure that your upper bearing plate and your strut and everything is lined up. Now we can go ahead and release the tension on the spring. Now that we have the spring released, I'm going to go ahead and throw a nut on here. I want to go ahead and torque this nut to 36 foot-pounds. I'm going to use our pry bar and nut here to hold this upper bearing plate. Torque that. Remove this nut. Now we're going to go ahead and remove our strut assembly and install it into the vehicle. Now we're going to install our strut the same way that we took out the old one. Feed that in, push this up into the strut tower. And what we want to do is get some of these bolts or those studs to come up through the engine bay. Now on the bottom here, just kind of rock that back, line this up. We can go ahead and get one of these lined up here for our knuckle. Here we go. With this kind of generally lined up, let's go ahead and finish up installing the nuts up top. And let's go ahead and snug these down. Torque down the nuts to 59 foot-pounds. We're done in the engine compartment. Let's go ahead and go back to the wheel well. Install the lower knuckle bolt here. We can go ahead and install the 10mm bolt for our brake flex hose here. Tighten that down. tighten down our knuckle bolts here. Torque down the 2 bolts here from the strut to the knuckle to 156 foot-pounds. Do this for both of them. Install your sway bar end link. Go ahead and get our nuts installed here. We're going to use our Allen key here. This is a 5 mil. Go ahead and torque the sway bar end link nuts down to 29 foot-pounds. Line that up, drop this down inside. Pop that through, get the nut started. Let's go ahead and snug this down. I'm going to use our 18mm socket to tighten this down. Let's go ahead and torque down this nut to 36 foot-pounds. You want to go ahead and try and locate the notch here in your ball joint stud, feed your cotter pin through. Now, if for some reason you can't find that hole here lining up with the castle nut notch, simply tighten down the nut till the next opening. Never loosen this here. Now our hole is right behind this little piece of the castle nut, so we're going to have to tighten this a little bit more. Use your pliers, cutters, bend that down and over. I'm going to bend that over. Cut off the excess. Go ahead and take your wheel. Line up those studs there. And get our lug nut started. Go ahead and torque your lug nuts down to 76 foot-pounds. Do this in a crisscross or a star pattern. If you have a hubcap or a center cap, go ahead and install that now. After finishing this installation, it's important to have an alignment done on your vehicle. And you're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.